We'll go ahead and start. Actually, this is on. My name is Marguerite Herman. Welcome. This is the League of Women Voters Forum for county offices. We've been going Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week. Tuesday with county commissioners. Yesterday, district attorney, sheriff, and county clerk. And tonight we're doing legislative races that will be on the ballot of Laramie County voters. And just to let you know, these will be also posted on our League of Women Voters website, which is up there, wyominglwv.org. And it will be broadcast by our local charter, Cable 19 and Channel 19, and I'll run through those dates. We're going to be doing all three of those, and so there'll be plenty of opportunity for the public to watch these. It's also being streamed live online, and you go to the link on the county government website for that link. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for the public to learn about the candidates and candidates to get their message out, because with League we want people to be informed and vote, and encouraging people to get involved in their government, and voting is one of the real basic rights and responsibilities of citizenship. So just those dates of rebroadcast on Charter Channel 19. For Commissioner, that will be rebroadcast this Saturday, July 12th at 11 a.m. The District Attorney, Clerk, and Sheriff's races, the forum from last night, will be rebroadcast Sunday, July 13th at 11 a.m. And the legislative race forums from tonight will be rebroadcast Tuesday, July 15th at 6 p.m. And again, they will be archived on the website for the League of Women Voters. And we will follow this up we have plans for an online voters guide, so we will give you questions. There will be probably these, maybe more, maybe different ones, for an online, so electronic kind of a voters guide where we're not going to be limited to time and space within reason. And so there'll be another chance to inform the voters and get your message out. So tonight, just to explain briefly how we've done this, you kind of think, well, what was your basis for inviting certain people in certain races? And I'm just going to take a minute to explain. When we sat down on June 1st, the day after the filing deadline, we took all the legislative races that had any kind of a primary battle going on. So any race that had more than one Democrat, more than one Republican, we said we're going to do those. And then we invited, once it was on our docket to do the forum, we invited everyone from both sides of the aisle to participate. Now tonight what you'll find out is that a lot of people declined to participate, couldn't, had conflicts, whatever, or just did not respond. So what we have tonight is sort of a strange situation where we actually don't have any primary opponents up on the dais together tonight. But we do have two people whose opponents did not show up. We want to give them a chance to answer their questions and inform the voters. And we have two races where we have the Republican and Democratic candidates. So we started out with every intention of having primary races featured, and that has not been the case, but we think the voters will get a lot of good information tonight. And we hope everybody follows this up. If you have questions for these or other candidates who didn't show up, we encourage you to get in touch with them. I'm sure they would love to talk. The primary is August 19th. Early voting started today, and the machines are down there in the atrium for people who want to come by during office hours and vote. Register and vote, as a matter of fact. Okay, so up in the dais with our first grouping tonight, we have two of the candidates for House District 9. Mike Weiland is the Democrat in that race. Kelly Sebastian is one of the Republicans in that race. And then we have Fred Emerich, who is the incumbent from Senate District 5. And let me just say a word, because I'm a League of Women Voters person, a little teachable moment here, is that the state has 60 House districts and 30 Senate districts. So people, and they are defined by residents, where you live. And so House District 9 is defined by where these two gentlemen live, and people who live in that district, that will be your voice, your person in the legislature. There is no incumbent running in that race. So, oh, wait a minute, there is. I'm sorry. And he's out of town. Dave Zwanitzer. I'm sorry. He is doing he's a committee chairman and he's out of town, so he sends his regrets. Fred Emerich is the incumbent from that race. His opponent declined to participate. That's what I meant to say before, sorry. And so we're giving him a chance to answer the questions. His opponent is not here, but he'll join the conversation up on the dais. So having said that, just briefly, here's how the evening will go. Everyone will get 2 minutes at the beginning for an opening statement. You can introduce yourself, use it any way you want to tell the voters who you are. You can talk about your issues, your personal, whatever. Then we'll run through the lead questions, a minute and a half each to respond. We'll give you, if anyone has something more to add, and after the others have spoken, something to add or to respond to, we'll let you have a few more seconds to respond. Then we'll move on to the next question. After we go through the lead questions, we'll take questions from the audience. Again, there are 3x5 cards. Write down your question, hand them up here. And then at the end, there'll be 2 minutes to close. You can, again, use that as you wish. You can use it to sum up, to amplify something you've said before, to respond, to bring up a new issue, however you want to work that. And that's how the evening will go. And we have a timer here who will hold up the 30-second warning, yellow card, the orange 15-second, and the shocking pink says stop. So if you can just, out of your peripheral vision, keep track of those, you'll know when you're coming to the end of your time. So we'll go ahead and start with, and we'll alternate the first person on this. We'll start with Mr. Weiland for your 2-minute opening.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. My name is Mike Weiland, and I wanted to thank Marguerite and the rest of the League of Women Voters, first of all, for having this forum. I think it's very important and to get to know the candidates here. So thank you very much for doing that. And I wanted to thank Kelly, too, here. I met him for the first time this evening, and I appreciate his willingness to run in this race. So, and Dave's Wanitzer as well, but he could not be here. So, I thought long and hard about running for this House District 9. I've lived in the district for about 28 years now, and as you can imagine, and I'm sure you know, it's a big decision to make. It's very much, very time consuming. But I must say, I tell people I think I recommend it now for everybody to at least do it once in their life, because you learn a lot and it's a great experience. You get to meet all of your neighbors. So the reason I decided to run was that ever since I've lived in town here in the district, I've always felt it was very important to give back to the community. I've been involved in many things, ranging from youth alternatives, mentoring kids, to helping out in schools, working on the Greenway, various sports organizations. And I thought this might be a next step to do that, to help out the district. And so that's the reason I wanted to run. And I also have seen that there's a number of people in the district that are in need, and I want to be able to put people first and really work on helping the citizens that we have in need in the district and the state. And I guess my time's up, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sebastian, 2 minutes.
I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, and you giving me the opportunity to be here. The main reason I'm running is I have a daughter who's a sophomore in high school, stepson who's going to be graduating next year, a senior in high school, and a granddaughter. I've been active in politics since I was age 12 and always had a strong interest in the legislature. The reason I'm running is one of the most important issues I feel deeply about is, first of all, education. I'm concerned about that issue. I want to get out and be a voice. I think the solution's in our district. And I believe the solution by going out and meeting people door to door, as Mike talked about, that's where you find the true solutions, and you get to know your neighbors and the people in the district. I look forward to meeting more of you as I go door to door, and I thank you for the opportunity of coming tonight.
Thank you. And Mr. Emerich, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Marguerite, and thank everyone for coming. I'm Senator Fred Emerich, running for re-election in Senate District 5. I'm an active member of the Cheyenne and statewide communities, and as a veterinarian, I bring an interesting aspect and perspectives to the legislature. My priorities are business. One is business, as I think we should support the Wyoming Business Council in its efforts to bring new businesses into Wyoming, provide both the infrastructure, both physical and digital, needed to encourage new businesses in the state of Wyoming and keep existing businesses. Education is also important to me. We spend over $15,000 a student, so we want to ensure that every student has the same opportunities for a higher quality education. That's to ensure all students receive comparable education, assessment, and accountability. My third point is responsive leadership. I have supported a variety of legislative items such as insurance coverage for inherited enzymatic diseases, purchase of state vehicles that operate on compressed natural gas, electronic proof of insurance, eliminating brand inspection rules to simplify transfer of animals, allowing the Department of Corrections to contract with private industry for the sale of products manufactured in state penal institutions. I've also been endorsed by the Wyoming Public Employees Association, the Wyoming Education Association, Wyoming Tribune Eagle, and the Wyoming Realtors. And I believe that I have a proven record and support for issues that are important to the Senate District 5 constituents.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and start with the questions, and we'll start with Mr. Sebastian with the League of Women Voters questions. The first one: the legislature has a great amount of power it can exercise over the other two branches of government through its ability to write laws and set budgets. Where should the legislature draw the line for itself in exercising that power? And you have a minute and a half.
I believe it's stated out already in our state constitution. I believe that you have the responsibility when you're an elected official to abide by that constitution that's already laid out. The key to politics is you work together, look hard at the issues, and come up with a solution. That takes all three branches working together, but that's how I believe it should function.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Emerich.
I agree that we have a system of checks and balances that was formed by the Constitution, both federal and state. And I've seen a number of cases where the governor has veto power, and he has wielded his pen several times since I've been in the legislature, primarily on budgetary situations. The courts have spoken on some certain legal issues we're all familiar with, and I think the balance that we have right now is quite good. And I'm not so sure that we should draw a line on where we should go. We have two other branches looking out after us.
All right, thank you. Mr. Weiland.
Thank you. I agree. I do think the three branches of the government in the state are working for the most part pretty well together with the checks and balances and doing their jobs to ensure that everything is working well. I am concerned somewhat with the, it seems like lately the legislature has kind of tried to micromanage some of the things on the budget, including the next generation science standards, things like that. But I do think, though, it's natural maybe the legislature, because we do speak for the people and set the budgets, maybe the legislature should have a little more say. But I think for the most part it's working well.
Thank you. Does anyone want a couple more seconds to comment or add? Okay, so we'll move to number 2. And we'll start with Mr. Emerich this time. Wyoming has a process to let people put proposed laws on the ballot if they gather enough voter signatures on a petition. But the requirements as they are now are almost impossible to meet. Would you support easing the requirements? Explain.
No, I don't think it would. And I think the reason is we have to have 15% of the total number of voters in the preceding election, and they must be collected over 2/3 of the state's 23 counties. And that comes to about 38,000 valid signatures. That's difficult to do. But there are also 90 members of the legislature, and I think you can probably convince a smaller number of them, if the issue is that important. I think you can convince your local legislators to bring whatever the issue is to the legislature for a good common vetting to see that it's a viable issue. So I would not change anything at the present time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weiland.
I think it seems to me that it's very difficult for petitions to go through in the state, and part of that's rightly so. It should be a difficult process, but I would support making it somewhat easier to do, requiring less signatures, and so ideas and petitions and stuff can be more easily accomplished.
Thank
you. Mr. Sebastian.
I would agree with Fred. I wouldn't support any change to the way it's currently set up. I, like Fred, strongly believe that that's the duty of our senators we elect, the people in the House that we elect, as well as the governor we elect. And I agree with them. We have the three branches, and all three of those branches are elected by the people and represent the people. And I believe the system we have in place works.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want another moment to comment? Okay, we'll move number 3. And we'll start this time with Mr. Weiland. Would you favor greater reporting requirements for lobbyists on who pays them and on the money they spend, influencing legislators? Explain.
Okay, was it my turn? I didn't catch that.
Yes, yeah, you can start now with.
I guess so. That's what I thought. Okay, sorry.
That's right.
I would.
I'm sorry. Did I?
No, you're doing the correct order.
You're
he
fine.
was just reassuring that he was doing it correct.
Okay,
Yes.
there you go. Sorry.
Yes. I would support greater reporting requirements on lobbyists and as to how they get, who pays them and the money they get. And I think that's one of the problems that we have statewide and nationwide today. We have far too many lobbyists, and they have far too much influence on the legislators. And so yes, I would support that. I think that would be very very important, and so that the public could see and the legislatures could see as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sebastian. You want me to read it again?
Yeah,
or
if
do
you
have
could
it?
just, yeah.
Okay,
just
sure.
refresh me.
Would you favor greater reporting requirements for lobbyists on who pays them and on the money they spend influencing legislators? Explain, because Wyoming has one of the least restrictive lobbying reporting laws in the United States.
Well, I do think that it's important that people are aware. It's the vision of transparency. I believe it's important for transparency, whether it be in meetings or the people who are lobbying on the Hill. That I think it's important to the people who elect us, if they have concerns in that they have available to them to see who is trying to sway our views or influence our views as well as theirs. So,
thank you, Mr. Emerich.
If you'll bear with me, I'll quote from the actual statute, 28-7-201. Each lobbyist activity report shall contain a listing of the lobbyist's sources of funding, each loan, gift, gratuity, special discount, hospitality, paid or given, as defined by the rules and regulations to or on behalf of any legislator, state elected official, or state employee acting in his official capacity, which exceeds $50. That has to be identified as to time and amount and date and everything. I think that probably handles things very well. And as far as the influence that lobbyists provide, there is some. But quite honestly, without a staff, we have the LSO, but when we have issues, I think the lobbyists are probably one of the finest sources of information. I hardly know of any lobbyists that say, I am advocating for point A, but they'll also bring in why point B is important also. I find them to be extremely important, very effective. I think they're quite honest, quite effective, and they have a code of ethics that is such that if any of them is ever caught in a falsehood, they don't have any credibility anymore. It's fine the way it is.
Okay, thank you. I'd have a response for that, but I'm not being questioned, so I'll hold my fire at this point. But and does anyone else want a couple more seconds to amplify or respond? Okay, we'll move on to number 4, and this time with Mr. Sebastian will lead the group. Would you favor raising the compensation for Wyoming legislators so more people from diverse backgrounds would be able to serve? And explain your answer.
I would say no. I believe that the people who desire to serve and who currently serve, they do come from diverse backgrounds. And I believe that a lot of us are elected from diverse districts. And part of that diverse district comes the diverse careers that people have had. If it's important that we have the diverse backgrounds, yes, but I don't think it's a civic duty to represent people, and I wouldn't want to increase pay in order to do that.
Okay, Mr. Emerich.
I really don't think we should change anything. $150 a day, we're really raking in the dough, and at $109 per diem. But raising the amount, I don't think is going to attract a more diverse group, because we've got, let's see, businessmen and women, engineers, attorneys, always have attorneys, veterinarians, nurses, educators, ranchers, railroad conductors, banker, pilots, clergy, and auctioneer. I suppose you could diversify a little more, but I keep thinking that we're doing just fine the way it is.
All right, Mr. Weiland, do you see a need for more diversity, and would higher compensation help us get there?
I agree with Fred and Kelly, but I do think that we do need a more diverse group of people in the legislature. It seems to be overly influenced by attorneys and people with maybe the money and time to run. However, with that said, I don't know if raising the compensation would help that. I would like to see more diversity, but I'm not in favor of raising the compensation.
Okay. Anyone want another minute or seconds to say something? All right. We'll move on to number 5. The state of Wyoming provides school districts the funds to provide a guaranteed education to students. What is the role of the legislature to create a system of accountability for those local school districts? And we'll start with Mr. Emerich on this one.
Thank you. Education accountability is probably one of the things that concerns me a great deal. I think we as a legislature are providing enough funds, about $15,000 a student according to USA Today. But I wonder if we don't fiddle with legislation to keep the teachers, and it brings the teachers off guard. They don't know where they're going to go, what they're going to do from one year to the next. And I think stability and accountability is needed. I also don't like the testing. You can't make a pig gain weight if you weigh him every day. And students don't work at the same speed, at the same rate. I think we need to change our assessment information a little bit, to where it can be nationally normed. I do agree with Common Core in the fact that we do need standards. And I think we must have standards set by the state, not by the federal government. So I think we have to stop fiddling. We as the legislature have to stop fiddling with all of the different things we provide to the teachers and let them go educate.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weiland.
Okay, thank you. I think the accountability issue is a big one in education. Right now, and talking to teachers, there's so much testing, so much various variety of testing. It's hard to have the kids accountable for their performance throughout the year, and as well for the teachers, because the teachers are being held accountable on different tests. So I think the legislature should finally come down with a standard set of tests and accountability, whether it be the MAPS test 3 times a year, or whatever. Right now, pause probably has too much of an influence. So, but I do think that's a big issue, and I think it needs to be talked about and working with the teachers and the educators to come up with a fair accountability for the teachers and the students.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sebastian.
As I stated in the opening, a very important issue to me is that of education. I believe it's the responsibility of the state legislature as well as the superintendent of schools to set a standard, to set a bar. But how that bar gets attained, we elect our local school board officials to serve and oversee our schools and our children. So I believe we set an expectation bar, kind of what Fred talked about a few minutes ago, that we need to have a set expectation bar. But it's the duty of the school board officials that we elect to hold the schools and everybody else and be aligned and accountable to not only hit that standard that we set ourselves, but to exceed that expectation. I, as a father, have an expectation of my daughter and her grades and that. I find that with the expectation, she wants to please and wants to reach that expectation. And I think expectation's a simple thing. It doesn't have to be word by word legislated, but I believe it can be. We do have to have standards and goals set and achieve those.
Thank you. And because we seem to have plenty of time, I'm going to follow up with a question, because you have a little diversity up there on this, but I guess, and we'll start again with maybe Mr. Emerich about how important is testing, since the legislature really puts those requirements on the school districts. That's one of the big things that's kind of on your plate. How important is testing, and should you have high stakes tests, and what do you learn from testing? Why has it become such a focal point?
Well, I think testing is important, but I think it should not be so pervasive that the teachers begin to teach to the tests. Each child moves forward at a different rate, and I think if we can allow for levels of competency type testing, which need to be done, I just really don't have a good handle on how we can find out how the kids are doing without some sort of testing. And back on the accountability issue, I think it's extremely important. If you'll all envision a 3-legged stool, we have accountability of the state through funding. We have accountability of the teachers through a variety of methods. But the one part of the accountability factor that we can't influence and is so terribly important are the parents.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Weiland, do you want me to, you don't have this one in writing, you want me to rephrase it a little bit? The importance of testing and
that's fine.
And high stakes.
I think currently, testing is an important aspect. You need to see how well the students are progressing throughout the year, how they're doing, what they need to be working on. And it also helps the teachers be accountable too in some form. However, I do believe there's too much testing, and like Fred said, a lot of times I think the teachers are teaching to the tests anymore. There's so much. I'm pretty much in favor of like the MAPS testing. You start of the school year, the middle, and the end of the school year, and you see how each student progresses differently, different rates, and that would show that this one student did progress at a different level perhaps than another student, but they did progress. So I do think it's very important, and the teachers and administrators can see that as well.
Thank you. Mr. Sebastian? High-stakes testing and the importance, what should be the point of testing and the stakes attached to them?
Well, I believe testing should be, as the others have stated, assessing where the children are at. It's important with the testing part that the teacher at the beginning of the year know where the students are and groom and the lessons and the class to the level that the students are at. I also believe that at the end of that first semester, it's important that they be tested and see how they progressed. And then a final test should be done at the end of the year to make sure that where the students are, those that aren't at the level of expectation at the end of the year that might need extra help or then that gives the parents and the teachers the opportunity to put the child in a summer class to get them back to where they need to be, but also assess where the others are at and make sure they're meeting the standards.
Okay, thank you. Since that was a follow-up, I don't know if anyone has anything more to add. I think we've exhausted that question. I'll move on to the next. This begins with Mr. Weiland. Do you support making health insurance available to low-income adults without children under optional expansion of Medicaid under federal health insurance reform? If not, what can or should the state do to make insurance available to low-income men and women?
Thank you. I think Medicaid expansion has to happen. I think it was a shame that it didn't happen this past session. I think there's far too many people. I've been out, talking to people in the district, and I'm working with probably about 10 or 15 of them now because they're in that situation. They can't get the health coverage, and they would have been able to be covered with Medicaid expansion. So I think it's very important, and it's something that needs to be done as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Sebastian.
I think Medicaid expansion is important. It needs to be looked at. It's important that those who aren't insured now have the ability to be insured at a cost that they can afford, that fits their family budget without sacrificing maybe their car, their home, or some of the other necessities. But we do need affordable health care for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Eklund. Emerich. I'm sorry, Mr. Emerich.
Well, Medicaid expansion has been brought to the legislature twice. And in 2014, Senate File 118 just about made it. We had enough to get it on the floor, or get it into committee, but we never got it out of committee. And I want a good, solid discussion on both floors, the House and the Senate, of Medicaid expansion. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to vote for it or I'm going to vote against it, but I really, really want to hear the arguments, because I can see so many people that the emergency room is not the way to get your primary care. And I really feel for the hospitals and the amount of unfunded care they have to provide. So I really want a thorough discussion on both houses, which we haven't had yet.
Okay, and let's see, is there anyone want to add anything to that? Or I guess I would follow up. I think Mr. Weiland made it clear that the state does have a stake in trying to find health insurance for this group that seems to be without resources. And I guess, Mr. Sebastian, you indicated that the state might have
I think we have some role, because if people don't have insurance, as Fred pointed out, they tend to go to the emergency room for their services, and part of the problem with them going to the emergency room is that's not, one, the correct place, and two, that in the end, those who are insured and have insurance wind up a lot of times absorbing and accepting higher cost in health care for the reason that the hospital has to absorb that cost somewhere. And I just think it's important that we get it addressed so that they are going to a doctor versus the emergency room.
Thank you. And Mr. Emerich, I guess the same question. Do you think the state has an interest in finding health insurance options for this group of people?
Yes, I do. Because every year, expansion of that group of about 17,000, I think, in Wyoming, that expansion gets farther and farther and farther into a yes vote on both sides of both houses. And I think it's kind of hypocritical to where the state can say, yes, I'll take mineral money, but I sure won't take Medicaid money. I think maybe we'll make it next time, I hope.
All right. Thank you. And again, anyone will have something to add? Okay. Well, that runs through the questions that we had prepared for this evening. And do we have any from the audience? We'll bring them up. We'll go through those, and we're doing very well on time. We'll try to get through 2 or 3 if we have them, and then we'll go to the 2-minute closings. So is this a 3-part, or is it 3 questions? All right, so offered anonymously, as you can tell. Okay, and I'm trying to think. We started with Mr. Sebastian that time, did we not?
I don't remember.
I'm sorry. Well,
I think it was me.
We ended up, I think, asking 2
Doesn't
rounds
matter.
there. So we'll start with you again, Mr. Weiland, if that's okay.
Sure.
Should there be any kind of internet tax to give Wyoming more diversification in the tax base? And that is the sales tax charged on internet sales, where that's why some of us shop at Amazon.com, so we don't pay sales tax, but then sales tax collections for the state suffer. So where do you fall on that?
I think there should be. I know talking to a number of the business owners in the district, and that's one of their concerns. I mean, they're kind of at a little bit of a disadvantage because they get taxed, the actual store, but Amazon.com, you don't. So I think in some form the state would need to have a tax on internet sales.
Thank you. Mr. Sebastian.
It's something you can look at. I know there's I know people that they do make money that way, having their own internet store and doing that. But I think it's, as the others have pointed out, it's important that you take a look at it because it does affect our downtown business district and the small stores that are trying to make ends meet to compete with them, because they do pay that and have to collect that.
And sales tax is a big part of local government support. Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted there, but Mr. Emerich.
Well, I think I'd like to point out, yes, I think there should be, but I want to point out one other thing. Theoretically, you're breaking the law if you don't pay that tax. That tax is due no matter what you do. I go to Fort Collins and buy a pool table. I've got to go up to the auditor or the Department of Revenue and fill out a form and pay that sales tax. And so I think Senator Enzi is bringing federal legislation, which I think is extremely important, because it isn't just getting out of the tax. The fact that you must pay the tax for the state's coffers, the county coffers, city coffers, That's all extremely important, and it's tax money that, it's not a new tax. It's taxes that are already due. You're just not paying them.
So
I think legislation is, I think an internet tax is extreme. Internet sales tax is important.
do you think, just follow up, do you think most people don't realize that that's an obligation, and even if they did, they wouldn't know how to proceed? Do you think that's an issue, maybe an education issue?
What do the attorneys say? Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
That's what they say.
That's what they say, but it happens.
Anyone want to add? Mr. Weiland?
Well, I kind of had a question. If you did buy that pool table in Fort Collins, aren't you paying the sales tax down there?
Not if it's delivered.
Not if it's delivered
Oh, okay,
here.
I missed that part.
So, okay. Let me see. I'm going to jump to number 3 on the card. Should the legislature weigh in on the Environmental Protection Agency's ruling on the monitoring of air quality to include the city of Riverton, when the air quality of the reservation, and they're including Riverton in that monitoring? And we'll start with Mr. Sebastian, if you have an opinion on that. It's been in the news. I don't know if you're familiar with the dispute.
No.
Okay. All right, then
Familiar
that's
with
fair enough. And Mr. Emerich, do you have an opinion on that subject?
Well, yeah, 2. 1, the state of Wyoming should have primacy in air quality in all cases. And 2, it's not the EPA's business to tell us where the boundaries are within our state.
Okay, and Mr. Weiland, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, from what I've heard, I do think that the state should have the final say, but I do think, though, that the EPA should be listened to, and I wish DEQ and EPA and would work better together to get some issues done, because apparently there was something identified by the EPA, and so it needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you. The third question offered by this person: whose responsibility is it to regulate social media after someone dies? And I would suspect that means that if the use of social media has ended up by bullying or targeting or whatever, ended up with someone's death, or let's say extreme hardship, should there be someone held responsible for that, or does freedom of speech protect that kind of thing? I don't know if, start with Mr. Sebastian, if you, I'm sorry, we started with you last time. Did we? No, we'll start with you this time.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I believe that law enforcement should have some input on it if that's happening. I know it does affect teenagers. I think the teenagers, I mean, I've got a young daughter, and she's involved in the social media thing, and teenagers are harsh to other teenagers. But if it comes down to where they're harassing or harming a teenager, and the teenager's in distress and there's no way out, we have to find a way to educate, in that case, teenagers on etiquette. And if we need to have officials, if necessary, step in and intervene if the parents aren't doing it, then law enforcement sadly is forced to be the parent and do that. But it does make a difference in lives, I believe, because we've lost kids in our community because that type of things happen, and that should not be acceptable.
Thank you. Mr. Emerich.
I think there should be consequences for actions. Freedom of speech is terribly important, but you don't go into use the old adage, you don't go into a crowded theater and yell fire. You're creating a situation that is really untenable. And if social media has some effect on a person's life, then I think if it can be proven, which is going to be a difficult situation, then I think those individuals should be held accountable.
Okay, and Mr. Weiland, how do you fall on that question?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think, along with the rights to use social media, I think it all comes down to we have the responsibilities to use it properly as well. I'm not sure, how that can be handled, but I think we all need to think about that. It goes along with many other things, but social media is included in that. I think that, we all need to be aware of what we're putting on there.
Okay. Anything to add? Or I just thought of a question. In the League of Women Voters, we take ballot issues, statewide ballot issues, and we do a pro and con backgrounder on them to help the voters figure out what the constitutional amendment even says and what are arguments for and against. And the one that's going to be on the ballot in November proposes that the Constitution be changed to allow the University of Wyoming to put on the Board of Trustees a non-Wyoming resident. And I was wondering if any of you, I'll just throw it out, if any of you have any kind of view of whether that's a good idea. The legislature passed it with a 2/3 vote, which qualifies it for the ballot, but so it wasn't unanimous. And do you have one thought or the other? Mr. Emerich was there when they voted on it, but I don't know if you want to offer an opinion, if the other two have opinions on that.
Well, I do have an opinion, and we touched on the word earlier here about diversity. And University of Wyoming graduates a large number of people, not as large as, say, Michigan or anything, but the diversity part of getting, Colorado representatives or those that move into other areas close to the state, still have interest in the University of Wyoming, but are not residents. And I think it provides more and more diverse input into the decision making by the Board of Trustees. You know where I stood on it. I voted for it, and I think it should pass.
Okay. Mr. Weiland and Mr. Sebastian, do you have an opinion on that, or?
I'll go. Okay. I think ideally that's what you would want. You would want a Wyoming resident to be on the Board of Trustees. But I think, and I'm just thinking in my mind here, there's probably, a fair amount of Wyoming residents that are relatively new to the state. And on the other hand, there's probably a fair amount of people in other states that have more ties and have lived in Wyoming longer than those people. So it's not, black and white there. But overall, I would do favor that it should be a Wyoming resident.
And Mr. Sebastian, how do you fall on the constitutional amendment?
I would support it. I believe the people who would be interested in serving the Wyoming board, Wyoming paid the education to them, and it's a way for them to pay the education back that they got as they move in their careers outside Wyoming. I think it's very important they have an opportunity to serve and have input on the university that got them where they are at today.
All right. Thank you very much. And that's all the questions. We'll move into the final part of this, which is the 2-minute closing. And thank you very much. I'll just say at this point, thank you for a good round. I think it's been a good rounds of answers for all our questions and from the audience. And let's see, Mr. Sebastian, we'll start with you, the 2-minute closing. And thank you. You use it any way you want.
Okay.
Cover anything you want.
Well, once again, I want to thank you all for coming this evening and participating. The government process is important to all of us, and all of us know that it affects our lives every day, and the only way to bring change about is by engaging and participating in that process. As I pointed out, family is very important to me. One of the first priorities for me is obviously education. Is brought out tonight, and I spoke with a lot of young families as well as elderly who the Medicare issue is very important to them. We need to get that addressed. We're funding our highways, they say, currently at 50%. it's important we take a look at that issue. There's a point that we can afford, but a lot of these issues, whether it be education, the highways, or other things, we haven't really addressed them. I would say we've kind of kicked the can down the road and said, well, let's take a look at it later down the road. But the problem is the further we push those issues that are important in the forefront further back, there's always going to be a cost to the people we represent as well as a cost for that particular program. And I think we need to take a deeper look at that. And those are some of the things that I want to do in the legislature is face the issue head on and deal with it and move forward. And I thank you for the opportunity tonight to speak to you and ask for your vote on August 19th.
Thank you very much. Mr. Emerich, 2 minutes.
Thank you. One of the important things to me is fiscal responsibility. And as a senator, I try to look at the cost and the benefits of expenditures. And when the benefits exceed the cost, I think that it's time to expend some of these funds. I'm motivated and dedicated to the community and the state, and I want the District 5 citizens to have a responsible, reasoned decision maker that understands the community issues, the state issues, and the impacts of decisions. And I also ask for your vote on Senate District 5.
Thank you. Mr. Weiland, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak with you, and I'm glad you all are here, and so thank you very much. I think the one of the reasons that I decided to run is that looking back at the past legislatures, I should say, and some of the main issues that people have, I think well, first of all, it seems like progress isn't being made very rapidly, and maybe that's the nature of the legislature. But perhaps more importantly, I think that we're losing track that the people of the state are the most important thing, and every decision that's made should be with them in mind. And I think we've kind of lost track of that. So I want to get back to that. I want to put people first. Some of the main issues that I have are education. I think that we need better accountability. I think we need to start kids in school at kindergarten and have them go through 18, and even have pre-kindergarten classes. The teachers are doing a great job. I think we need to encourage parents to be accountable for their kids too in class. And we need to, along with education, a better educated workforce, I think, would be able to attract higher quality, good jobs that we need in the state. And finally, I think we need to take a look at getting cleaner coal and moving away and moving into more renewable energy sources and research. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to the candidates for giving up their time to answer the questions from the League and the public. Thank you. So it's 6:23. I think we'll try to start the next round at 6:30, so 7 minutes, if that's adequate for people.
Let me briefly mention it.
You can take your seats, everyone, and I'll go in with introductions now.
Oh, really? Did you get his survey?
We want to welcome everyone who's here in person, people who are streaming online, and people who will watch this later on the internet or on local Charter Cable Channel 19. My name is Marguerite Herman, and this is a forum by the League of Women Voters of Cheyenne. We are political, but we're nonpartisan. We don't favor one candidate over another. What we do try to do during election season is to help voters understand the candidates, help the candidates get their information out to the voters about their positions and issues, and we hope these forums serve that purpose. Tonight, we are doing the legislative races. Just to recap, on Tuesday, we did the county commission. On Wednesday of this week, yesterday, we did 3 county offices, district attorney, sheriff, and county clerk. And tonight we're doing the legislative races that will show up on the Laramie County ballot. They will be, and I'll just give you the broadcast dates on the on Charter Channel 19. The commissioners forum will be rebroadcast Saturday, this Saturday, July 12th at 11 a.m. The district attorney, clerk, and sheriff's forums will be broadcast Sunday, July 13th at 11 a.m. And the forums tonight will be rebroadcast on Tuesday, July 15th at 6 p.m. They will be archived on the League of Women Voters website. You can see the URL up there, wyominglwv.org. I'm not sure when they'll get posted, but soon. The primary is August 19th. And encourage everybody to get out and vote, because in a lot of races in Wyoming, that is the election. So don't miss that one. Early voting started today, and here in Laramie County, we're lucky enough to have a semi-permanent polling place down in the atrium of the courthouse. So you can come in 8 to 5 and register and vote. So please do that. Just to explain briefly the setup that we're using tonight. On June 1st, when the filing deadline had passed, the Cheyenne League sat down and said, what are the races that have a contested primary? So we picked out those, and we said, and then in those races, we'll provide a forum if the candidates will come, and we'll invite all the candidates in the race, Democrat and Republican. And so we've had several people who cannot come, a few people who don't want to come, and a couple of people we have not heard from at all. So we don't have a lot of folks tonight, but we hope that you will get information about these people in these important races. We are doing it in 2 groups. We've had a group of 3 come up earlier, and I'll introduce these gentlemen tonight. They have been given questions ahead of time, so we'll ask them those. And those in the audience, if you want to ask questions, we have 3x5 cards on the podium and a pen. Please write down your questions and bring them up here, and we will try to get them tonight. If we don't, and actually, if you have other questions you think of later, our email is up there, lwvcheyenne@gmail.com. Write us those questions, and we will try to incorporate them in an online voter's guide. We'll try to get all the relevant information to the voters before they vote. And again, early voting starts, so we'll try to do that quickly. And up here tonight we have one contested race represented. We have in House District 10, and let me just say parenthetically too, that the Wyoming has 60 House seats, House districts, and 30 Senate districts. So what we have up here are candidates who are running in 2 districts that are within Laramie County. And let me just say, if you don't know which district you live in, because some people don't know that, if you go to the website for the Legislative Service Office, and you can just Google that, and then they will take you to a place where if you type in where you live, because these are geographically based, they'll tell you which district you live in, then you'll know which race you're electing. And these gentlemen would want to serve in the House of Representatives in your district to represent you. So this is important. And so we have Tom Jones, who is a former legislator, has held former statewide office, and served as a deputy to a statewide office, auditor. And he's running in House District 42, and his opponents could not make it tonight. And running in House District 10 is Gaylen Wright, who is the Democratic candidate in that race, and John Eklund, who is, and we've had to edit the name card on there, misspelled, put an extra C in the name, which I apologize for, but we've corrected it now. And John Eklund is the incumbent in that race. And there are other Republicans in that race. They did not respond to our invitation. So we're glad these gentlemen could make it tonight, and we will proceed just, with the format, which I will describe very briefly now, which is, excuse me, we'll open with a 2-minute opening statement, which you can use any way you want, introduce why you're running, your issues. Then we'll move into the questions, 1.5 minutes each, and after each question there will be a brief chance to respond if you want to add or respond to another candidate, and then a 2-minute closing. And again, we'll take questions from the audience until that last closing, and we have a timer up here who will show you a yellow card for 30 seconds remaining, orange card with 15, and then the shocking pink, which says stop. So just try it out of the corner of your eye. Keep track of those as time goes. So we'll start with Mr. Jones, and we'll try to alternate. We'll try to keep track of the order of things, and start with your 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Marguerite, and thank you for all of you coming. I appreciate, as everybody else has said, the fact that you're putting this on and giving us an opportunity. The reason I'm running, among many of them, is the fact that in House District 42, like all other districts in Wyoming, there's only one vote. And that vote has to be cast in an informed way. It should be cast by an experienced person, and the person who occupies that seat needs to be ready to vote and cast those votes in a timely manner. I wish to have a legislator in our district that is a person who is willing to work for progress and not just oppose things. It's one thing to say no, but if you're going to say no, you better have an alternative. And I think I can tell you a little later on maybe about some of the alternatives I've proposed and things I've done over the years. But I'm here to try to bring some experience and knowledge from a lifetime of experience to House District 42.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Marguerite, for having me, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for making it more important to have this forum for the community, for the district, and for the state if the state decides to watch. The reason that I decided to run for this office is first to acknowledge the farmers and the ranchers of our community who bravely chose to ride the roller coaster of farming and ranching, including John. Okay, they are the breadwinners, not necessarily the breadwinners that bring it to our house and homes, but they are the people that put it on the available to us so they can put it on the table. I'd also like to represent, as a representative, the farmers, including the farmers and ranchers, I already said that, the veterans of our community. The veterans of our community have established the saying that land of the free because of the brave. I'd like to represent all of the workers, including the bank tellers, administrators, bus drivers, state workers, educators, union members, and leave no one behind. I'd like to speak in the legislative body when things come up, and I like to be the reminder that we are not just talking about abstract items, we are actually talking about people and the things that affect their daily lives and the decisions that are made at that body. I'd also like to speak for the people that are under stress because they don't have the medical insurance that we'll be talking about later. The people that are under stress for reasons beyond their control. I'd like to be the voice of all those people, and that's why I'm running for this office.
Thank you. Mr. Eklund.
Well, thank you for having me. I guess I would start by saying that I've been in various forms of public service all of my life, and I started 2 terms ago in the House of Representatives, and I'm running because there's work undone and a lot of education that I got along the way that I'd like to continue to use. One of the things that I can bring to the House of Representatives and in service to my constituents is I'm a farmer and a rancher, and I'm well versed in all forms of agriculture, and I bring that to the Ag Committee and to the House floor, and it's part of the diversity that I think is needed by a citizen legislature. because I'm a farmer and a rancher, I'm a problem solver. It seems like a daily task of rearranging your schedule and redoing things that break down or whatever, and trying to figure out a way of making things work that are difficult and tend to be a lot more complex than you would expect them to be. And the legislature is just exactly that. We get together and we try to solve problems. So that's one of my strong points. The other one is that I get along well with people. I've found that getting along with people and trying to come to consensus is a better type of leadership, I believe, than battling away. I like to live at peace, and I do. There isn't a legislator that has been around for the last 4 years that I couldn't go and talk to and get along with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move into the questions from the League of Women Voters. Remind people again, if you have a question, put it down on a card and bring it up. Okay, and we'll start with Mr. Wright. The legislature has a great amount of power it can exercise over the other two branches of government through its ability to write laws and set budgets. Where should the legislature draw the line for itself in exercising that power?
Well, the three branches of government, the legislative body, the judicial branch, and the executive branch, have to constantly communicate. There is no line that should be drawn, and there should be no threat of a line being drawn, because that shuts down the communications process. Everyone has a specific purpose. The legislative body establishes the laws, votes on the laws, and sends the laws to the governor for his signature. In some cases, if the governor vetoes the law, then it can go back to the legislative body, and they can override the veto with the supermajority. And it will go into effect whether the governor signs it or not. Once that takes place, then the judicial branch is required to enforce the law. And the reason that the communication is imperative amongst the three groups is because at one point or another, each of them will touch that purpose and touch that law or the supposed law that is trying to be passed. So once the communication starts, it can't be stopped. And if we start talking about drawing lines in the sand, so to speak, then that's a veiled threat, and it's going to end the communications process. We want government to be successful. We are all citizens, and the only way that it can be successful is if we continue to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eklund.
Well, I believe that the way the system is set up, it works well. The legislative branch, as Gaylen just mentioned, is the lawmaking part. The governor also has a lot of power. He has a lot of influence over the budget, and then the courts draw into this as a checks and balance. I don't believe that we draw the line on the law because, and in what we do, because the way we're doing it, it works. If you've got a law that you want passed, if it isn't going to work, the legislature shuts it down. If they don't shut it down, and the governor doesn't agree with it, he can veto it. So I think the system as it is works, and I think that the power of the legislature is just as it should be to write the laws and work on that end of it. There's 300-400 bills that come to the legislature every year, and they're important to somebody, and it involves lawmaking. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Jones.
It's important to remember that the legislature, in doing its duties with laws and the budget, is exercising the constitutional requirements that are placed upon it by our Wyoming Constitution, and at the same time, it's exercising the will of the people. I think the legislature of the three branches of government is the closest branch to the people and is more in tune with what they want and need than the other two branches. There is one place that I would like to see the legislature exercise more restraint than it has, at least of recent, and that's in the budgets, the issue of budget footnotes. I think that we need to go back to the beginning or square one or something and understand that a budget's purpose is to fund government. Its purpose is not to set policy for government. And I think that we need to, well, the legislators need to exercise restraint and use the budget to fund and not to be setting policy.
Thank you. And does anyone want to take another few seconds to comment or expand? Okay, we'll move on to the second question then. Wyoming has a process to let people put proposed laws on the ballot, the initiative and referendum process, if they gather enough voter signatures on a petition. But the requirements are so stringent they are almost impossible to meet. Some say that if you don't have paid signature gatherers, it's really impossible. Would you support easing the requirements, maybe taking them back to where they started out, or some other method? And please explain. We'll start with Mr. Eklund.
The present system, I think, is adequate. I know that it's a difficult threshold to meet, but it has been done before. Term limits were put on the ballots, and they collected signatures. They got that done. It was subsequently ruled unconstitutional, but anyway, it was done. I think that it should be difficult to do it because we're in a representative form of government where people elect and send a representative to speak for them. You could get into some problems if every time citizen groups wanted something done, they put it on the ballot for a vote, such as taxes or not such popular parts of what we have. So I think there were Jeffersonian principles. One of them was that there could be a problem with the tyranny of the masses, and they foresaw that, and that's why they set the government, the Constitution up the way they did it. And I think that we're following the Constitution fairly well by doing it that way.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
I would support easing those requirements, primarily in the number of signatures or the percentage that would have to be acquired. The geographical distribution, I think, is worthwhile. I was the campaign manager, so to speak, of one of the first initiatives that ever passed, and that was at supposedly the easiest time. Let me tell you, it was not easy. It was very difficult, and it was very expensive. And all that has happened since then is to make it more difficult and more expensive. Now, for the past 38 years, I've been involved with the legislature in one form or another on both sides of it, and I am a huge, huge fan of the legislative process and a believer that it is the greatest thing we have. But there are times, for whatever circumstances, that the people may need access through a different method than through the legislature, and so I think we do need to have reasonable restraints on, you don't want to have it too easy to do, but we do need to make it somewhat easier than it is now.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I think that the process now required by the Wyoming Constitution should stand as it is. And the reason I say that is because in 2012, almost 300,000 people voted. It requires 15% of the people within that electorate to sign a petition to get it to pass. So say, for example, 220,000 people, that would leave 220,000 people out of a process. And what I mean by that is approximately, with that number of people voting, 15% is going to be, say, 37,000 people. So to circumvent Wyoming law for the sake of those 37,000 kind of negates the voice of the vast majority of people who either didn't sign the petition, didn't know about it, had no opinion about it. For whatever reason, they didn't get enough signatures. If they did get enough signatures, it would come in as a referendum, and then eventually it would get to the voting process once the signatures were verified by the Secretary of State's office. we can't circumvent the number of people that didn't necessarily sign the petition, and that much of a majority, their vote has to stand.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want a couple more seconds to respond or comment further? Okay, we'll go to the next question. And we'll start this time with Mr. Jones. Would you favor greater reporting requirements for lobbyists on who pays them and on the money they spend influencing legislators? Explain.
No, I would not suggest any changes. Let me correct your statement of influencing. I disagree with that. I would say that lobbyists educate legislators, but they don't influence them. The legislator then, with the information they have received, is free to make up their mind any way they want. If you don't like the lobbyist disclosure law, blame me. I wrote about 2/3 of it many years ago. But I don't think the problem is what you think it is. If you're talking about money that is paid to a legislator or is paid on behalf of a legislator for to go out to lunch, to go to dinner, to have a beer, whatever, that's not a problem. In the 22 plus years I was a lobbyist, if you had given me $1,000 when I started to do that sort of a thing, I can give you money back today of money that I didn't spend influencing, or as I would say, educating them. As was pointed out in the earlier group, we already know who's paying them. It becomes very difficult to know what it is you want to find out. Some people are on salary. Is the salary of a person the business of the rest of the world any more than your salary or anybody's salary out there? I was a contract lobbyist. Do I report my gross income, my net income, or what? There's just too many problems with trying to do it. The public has the information it needs right now, and I think the law is just fine.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wright.
I agree. I wouldn't favor changing the law as it stands now, and I say that because legislators make decisions based on bettering the daily lives of citizens, and that's their calling. Citizens are the state, so that is an action that requires the legislators to follow what the citizens actually want them to do. So legislators here, as Fred said earlier, they don't have a staff. So the lobbyists are actually educating legislators, albeit from their own perspective, but legislators are not dumb people. They know that going in. So a lobbyist has a job to do. So one thing we already know is who they're working for because of what they're talking about. That's who's paying them. The other thing is, I don't know if they really influence a legislator. I mean, John could probably answer that better than myself because no one's approached me. But I don't know if they really influence a legislator, but they do inform the legislator. And is it influence if the legislator was already leaning in that direction and adopted that idea because two heads are better than one, and they came up and it supported exactly what they were saying?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eklund.
I'd like to see it left the way it is. The reporting requirements are fairly extensive as they've been explained. I think Senator Emerich probably read those off to us. The other people that report are the legislators. We report the money that we're giving, and it's I don't think it's overly burdensome, but I don't think we need anything more than that. The lobbyists for me are a tool in my education of bills. You can't possibly know everything there is to know about 300 or 400 bills, and they're very diverse. I know agriculture well, and I'm on the Revenue Committee, and I know those bills fairly well. But the other ones, you depend on lobbyists and any resource you can get. And as was mentioned before, a lobbyist that isn't honest or isn't straightforward and truthful finds themselves in trouble. If they're paying for dinner or they're paying for receptions and whatnot, it shouldn't influence my vote, and I don't think it does. I think when it comes down to it, you've got some notes written up, you've weighed the thing out, and you're trying to represent the people of Wyoming the best you can with all of the information you have. Lobbyists are just part of that.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want another chance to speak on that issue? All right, we'll move on to number 4. And we'll start now with Mr. Wright. Would you favor raising the compensation for Wyoming legislators so more people from diverse backgrounds would be able to serve? Explain.
I'm at a crossroads with that question. That's probably the toughest question that you're going to ask today. As a state employee, when the legislative body, whether they were national or here in Wyoming, were talking about raises for themselves, then I was always against it. But as a state employee, if I was given the opportunity to vote on a raise for myself, of course I'd be for it. So, selfishly, of course. To diversify the legislative body, to say that it's not diverse already, I would have to know the background of every single legislator to find out if they are diverse and where they come from, their backgrounds, how much money they make. I guess that's part of it. How much money they make. Are they self-made men? Are they rich? Are they poor? I'd say that some of them are probably rich. The majority are probably not. So I would say that, I can say yes. I can say yes, they should. I know the teachers. When I was working for the State Patrol, I was in Lusk. A teacher that got elected to the legislative body had to find his own replacement to come, and he didn't receive compensation at that time while he was in the legislative body for his work or for the medical. So I just can't answer that question, yes or no.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Eklund.
Yeah, I would like to see it left the way it is. I think that most of the people who serve in legislature do it because they have a heart for it, and you're not in it for the money. The $150 a day. People make a lot of fun of the attorneys. Most of them are making $150 to $500 an hour, and they come and do a job for 6 weeks to 2 months for $150 a day. I guess what I would like to say is a way of maintaining the citizen legislature that we do have is probably to keep it out of the professional realm and a large salary. There are states that are very poorly run that have a pretty good salary, and the people are full-time, and I don't want to see that come to Wyoming. I like the diversity of it. I like the idea that the people coming to it are offering themselves as servants, and I think it should be left the way it is.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
I would not propose raising the salary because I don't believe that's the problem to diversity. A few days ago, the Casper Star-Tribune had an article about county commissioner races in both Laramie County and Natrona County, and pointed out the salaries in the respective counties were vastly different, but neither county had a lack of candidates running for the job. Personally, I believe the problem with diversity in our legislature is the fact that we have single-member districts. We have an inability for newcomers to get in because of the power of the incumbency. They have too much advantage. I think back to the days when I was in the legislature before, when we were elected county-wide, and I remember Laramie County very well. It had always had several women. There probably were more women in the legislature in those days than there are Democrats in the legislature now. Because of that, a great friend of mine, one of the finest legislators I ever served with, was Walt Erbekite. I don't think he would have ever been elected in a single-member district. He was a fantastic statesman, but he wasn't the greatest politician in the world, and he probably wouldn't have been a very good campaigner. But there is a solution to this, or at least I have a proposal that maybe it's not the solution, but I have an idea that might work. But with the time just ran out, I'll save it for later.
Well, on that note, I can't resist. I'm going to ask, I guess, and everyone will have a shot at this, if you would support going to multi-member districts or even back to the original county-wide races where everyone ran in kind of a horse race and the top finishers got seated. I don't know if that would pass constitutional muster, but let's go ahead and at least talk about multi-member districts. And since you brought it up, Mr. Jones, why don't you start, and we'll see if the other two can add anything to that.
I would not advocate going back to county districts. The original Supreme Court decision in 1963, I think, Baker versus Carr, to apply that to Wyoming, you would have a legislature of, I don't know, 150 or something like that. It doesn't work. My proposal or my suggestion that deserves to be talked about, I don't know if I'm advocating it or not, but is to take 2 of our existing Senate districts, reduce the number of Senate districts from 30 to 15, and those 4 House districts that are contained in those 2 Senate districts, the 2 senators would be elected at large and the 4 House members would be elected at large. You absolutely perfectly comply with the law just as we are right now, because nothing has changed except you've got, instead of 1 person representing a district, you have either 2 or 4 representing a district. There is a downside, and I think that's the fact that you're going to be campaigning in larger areas, and it probably would be more expensive. But with a slate of 4 people running for the House, I think that gives the opportunity for the person who is the statesman but not the politician to sneak in there maybe on occasion, and I think you will get more diversity.
I'll just offer to either Mr. Wright or Mr. Eklund, do you want to weigh in on the topic of whether single-member districts maybe is part of the reason why we don't have more people running, multi-member districts? What are you thinking?
I don't think that increasing the number would add to diversity. I think that it would probably cause people not to seek office, more so simply because it would be more expensive to run. When I first decided to run for this seat, I didn't even take into consideration pay. And then when I heard another legislator talking about it, it dawned on me. I said, oh yeah, we get paid. So the way that it is now, I think it's very effective. I think it's very effective, and with the legislators that are spread about, you can contact your legislator more easily than you would if they were further away.
Thank you. And Mr. Eklund.
Yeah, I think to change it very much from where it is, I understand the constitutional way we're doing it now, and Tom mentioned a different way that he's pretty sure would work, but it sounds like it could leave some of the citizens underrepresented, and maybe not. Maybe it would increase that. But I'm just thinking of some problems that would. This is something that would take, I think, several sessions to try to figure out. And I'm not sure that we don't have a really good system now. I think the other system of 12 people running for the whole county was probably not a good way to do it. This one's much better.
And that would be the outcome would be the districts would become larger, and the possibility of that being spread out geographically might be compromised there. But I appreciate your bringing up and addressing the topic, which wasn't on the agenda, but it was interesting nonetheless. And I know legislators talk about that now and again. So, well, proceeding with the questions, and Mr. Eklund, you're up at this would be. The state of Wyoming provides school districts the funds to give a guaranteed education to students wherever they live in the state, big, small, rich, poor. What is the role of the legislature to create and maybe insist on a system of accountability?
Presently, Wyoming has one of the highest cost educations in the nation. I believe that it is the responsibility of legislature to adequately fund in order for students to get a quality education. I do believe that accountability plays into it, I think that the legislature has a responsibility there. Presently, Wyoming's education, we have tremendous, with that amount of money, we just have a tremendous amount of opportunity to be the best education in the nation. And I don't know what all's going wrong with it, but I know we're in the bottom third. The nation isn't the best in the world. We have the Hathaway scholarship system. The bottom tier of that, 10% of them are failing out of, are giving up their scholarship at the end of a year or so, semester or so. I think that we have, legislature has a responsibility to attach with that money the responsibility and accountability. We've found teachers that have determined ways of making parents accountable as well. So it's not just the teachers, but I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. We spend a lot of money, and there's great opportunity here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
I think the role of the legislature in this accountability, which I think is an absolute necessity in light of the money that we're spending on education, the role is leadership and coordination. Leadership and coordination with the districts, because obviously they have a huge voice in it, and we need to involve the districts, and that includes the professional educators as well. One thing I'd like to see is reduction in the testing. My neighbor is a retired teacher and administrator in this area, and when he told me the number of weeks that we spend per year testing kids in this state, it boggled my mind that we're testing and not teaching. So we need to find at least one, maybe two, hopefully not more than two tests that are nationally recognized that will allow us to test the students, test the teachers, test the districts, to find out what we're getting. And obviously this testing has to compare not only the schools within Cheyenne and Laramie County, it has to compare the schools from Cheyenne to Casper to Powell, it has to compare Wyoming schools with Mississippi and New York and California, and quite frankly, in this world, we have to compare Wyoming students with the students of the world. We can't stick our heads in the sand and say, well, we're going to test our kids against our kids, and that's all. We have to compete with the world, and we have to test and compare against the world.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wright.
The question is, the end of the question is, what is the role of the legislature to create a system of accountability? Well, that's already done, because there are committees established that determine where the funds are going to go. And in some cases, people come and present testimony to those committees. During that testimony to those committees, the communication door must be open. The question must be asked as far as accountability. When you are building a new school and you are receiving funds from the legislative body, then is a school being built to current levels? And if the answer is yes, then explain what current levels are. Current levels should not mean that once a school is complete, then it's already too small, because that means that they didn't check, that there were no checks and balances to whoever determined what the current levels were, that would say, go through the neighborhoods, how many school-age children are going to be moving in next year. I think that's part of the accountability, the communications. To register, a parent should not have to go to the school at 11:30 at night and to register the kid at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's where the accountability failed, and it has to start at that committee meeting, and those questions have to be asked. And communication, the doors of communication must remain open.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to add anything at this point? Yes, Mr. Eklund.
Yeah, I didn't have quite enough time, but I think something that would help the whole school system out would be competition. And our state laws are not set up for competition. There's quite a bit of resistance by the legislature to vary from our public school system. We have public schools, and then we have homeschoolers, and very little private schools, very little charter schools. the laws are not favorable, I think that setting up a system of competition would probably force some accountability also.
Does anyone want to respond to that or anything they said?
I certainly agree with John on the idea of competition. Charter schools across the nation seem to have a pretty good record. What bothers me with our current law is the fact that the local school district, wherever it may be, has so-called veto power over a charter school. And that's a huge conflict of interest, because the money that would go to the district then flows to the charter school, and obviously the district is not about to give up its money. So that's a very unfair situation.
Okay. Do you want to weigh in on that, Mr. Wright?
I do. Okay. That any plans that are adopted, again, that are addressed and funding is established through the committee, the plan has to be a feasible plan. So there has to be research done to find out if the plan is feasible. And once the plan is adopted, then there needs to be follow-up to determine if everything is accurate and following the schedule. And if it's not, then we have to revisit where the funds are going to go for the next time around.
Okay, thank you. And I think we'll move on. If you want to address this further, you'll have time at the end. So take notes if you have more to weigh in on that topic. And the final question is, and this time we'll start again with Mr. Jones, do you support making health insurance available to low-income adults without children under the optional expansion of Medicaid under federal health insurance reform? If not, what can or should the state do to make insurance available to low-income men and women?
Yes.
Okay. So that was yes to the first part, so the second? Well, that was terse. Okay, good. And,
you want more?
If you want to amplify, this is the chance.
I can tell you why. Some years ago, there was a proposal that came out of Congress for an expansion of Medicare for children, and it was called Kid Care. And as a lobbyist, I was opposing that because that's what my client wanted. And the reason that everybody was told to oppose it, and I bought into it, was you can't trust the federal government. They'll give you this money and then they'll disappear someday. Well, you know, darn it, they didn't. It's still there. The money is still there. Now, I'm not a huge fan of our federal government and the way it does some things, but I guess you have to trust someday. And if the federal government has promised to pay X dollars for however many years, I trust that it's going to be there. So therefore, I support expansion of Medicaid.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I agree. Too many times we wait until we reach crisis level before we have to take action. Well, this is one of those times. There are people now that need it now. It's been through the House and the Senate a couple of times, and it didn't get passed. If we sometimes forget that things that don't affect us personally, they don't affect us personally. We forget that they actually affect other people. People are suffering because of that. We need to get it taken care of. And when the federal government is going to pay the majority of that, from my understanding, the federal government is going to pay the majority of that. Well, we've already paid for it because they're giving our tax dollars back. Everybody in Wyoming pays federal tax. So they're giving tax dollars back. If we have the opportunity to get tax dollars back for something good, then we need to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Eklund.
I'm going to piggyback on something Senator Emerich said earlier. I don't know how I would vote on it. It hasn't come to a full debate. It needs to really be debated out. The Health Committee has struggled with coming up with a solution on what to do with the expanded Medicaid. I think people are a little bit afraid of it. The other Medicaid started where the federal government paid for it, and they weaned themselves off of it, and the state now has the burden, and it's a huge burden, and there seems to be no limit to the check we write for that. I think that we're probably already paying for it. That, as Gaylen mentioned, if we're not paying for it through taxes, we're paying for it through medical costs and things passed on to whoever does have insurance. So somehow it's getting paid for anyway. we should be getting tax money back services from the federal government. I guess I would, I'd like to see a debate on it. I'd like to come up with some solutions. There are some problems with the way it's set up now. The ceiling on it is $90,000. There are families making $90,000 that are not, or $89,000 that aren't budgeting for health insurance, and I think that's kind of irresponsible. Those would be the people in that little gap, and we have to address that too.
Okay, and just to clarify, the Medicaid expansion under discussion would affect people up to about 135% of federal poverty, which is about $15,000 a year for an individual. So I think that's a different group. But anyway, but I appreciate your thoughts. And anyone else want to expand or comment?
I think it was a senator that said earlier, excuse me, go ahead. I think it was a senator that said earlier, 17,000 people? Was it 17,000? People that don't have any medical coverage. We have to remember when we talk about that kind of thing, we are talking about people.
Yeah. Yes? Follow up?
I guess, well, I probably, it'd be too involved if I get into much more of a discussion. I think it's a huge problem. I think 90 to 90, the governor included, everybody needs to get their head wrapped around it before we just take the money. We have to have a plan.
Okay, and I hope it does come before the legislature. Whoever gets elected or reelected, I hope it is on the table for the coming session. Editorial comment. Great, and if you have anything you think of in the next few minutes, you can cover it in your wrap-up comment. And those are the lead questions we had prepared. We do have some questions from the audience, and we have more. Thank you. All right, so. And this time we'll start with Mr. Wright. Last year, the legislature considered and defeated a bill. I was trying to remember how it died, but I know it did die, which would have provided compensation to individuals wrongly incarcerated and determined innocent by DNA. What is your position? And it was a bill that went through the process, ended up in conference committee, and it did die. I'm not quite sure how.
Okay. Someone that's wrongly incarcerated, proven to be innocent, has had their life, liberty, and freedom taken away unjustly, they must be compensated in some way, form, or fashion. And it could be as simple as determining what kind of position they had before they were incarcerated and compensating them up for the time that they've lost in that position monetarily, and probably some type of grant that they could go back to school on to catch up, because you don't catch up in jail. Or keep up in jail. You don't keep up in jail. Does that answer your question, though?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Mr. Eklund.
Yeah, the bill you're talking about came to the House floor. It came out of the Judicial Committee. It was a committee bill. The bill was amended several times, and it was pretty well cobbled up by the time we got to the third reading. And I voted against it because I felt like we had to get this. These are judicial laws that we're establishing, and I think we need to have it right before, and there has to be clear understanding that the bill is right, and that's why I think it failed in the conference committee. It passed the House. Had already passed the Senate, I believe. Anyway, when it got into a conference committee situation, it was over the amendments, and the bill wasn't very clear. And so I think if the bill was really clear, I would have voted for it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
As I recall that discussion, the overriding issue in the conference committee, or the amendments from the House, was whether there should be a second trial before compensation would be awarded, a second trial that finds the person was not guilty. And I think that's unreasonable and unnecessary. I would suggest we have compensation if the person has been released. It's a pretty high burden for somebody to get out of jail. And to put them through a second trial, who knows how many years later, would make it very difficult to get a just result out of that trial either direction. So the idea of the second trial, I think, is unnecessary and unfair, and I would support a bill that would do it without a second trial.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to add anything at this point? We'll go on to actually a second question offered by the same individual. What actions, if any, would you recommend by the legislature, is what I'm assuming, in view of the possible reduction in the use of coal as an energy source in the United States? So it's legislative action reacting to the reduction in demand for coal as a marketplace. So I guess we will start with Mr. Jones.
Well, the first word that comes to mind is diversification. We have to diversify our economy. I don't think we need to wait for coal to be reduced to some really low level. We need to do it yesterday. We need to look at expanding our economy in other areas, manufacturing, value added for agricultural products, whatever we can find. We need to look at alternative energies. We have some great big windmills sitting out here. Wyoming has a lot of wind. We need to take advantage of that. We need to look at the technologies for coal in an attempt to make it more attractive to those who think it's the evil of the world. I don't know what the solution is as to how you clean coal. There's some awful smart people working on it. We've heard the talk about it, the coal to fuels plant here. Maybe that's a solution, coal to gas, whether it's gasoline or natural gas. Maybe that's a possible solution. But we just need to look at everything we can. The legislature needs to provide the leadership and the encouragement for all of those things, whether it's in the area of research or economic development.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. What actions, if any, would you recommend that the legislature take in view of the possible reduction of the use of coal as an energy source in the United States?
Okay, that's what I thought you said. Currently, the number one buyer of Wyoming coal is, and I read this today, is South Korea, not China. We have to diversify our economy, and part of that is using different types of energy sources. Okay. Now, the reason that I believe South Korea is the number one buyer of Wyoming coal, and could be an even larger buyer if they could ship it out of the West Coast, on West Coast ships from the West Coast. So I think that the reason that South Korea is the number one buyer of Wyoming coal is because I was in South Korea. And in South Korea, some people heat their houses with coal in the floors. I would go out and I would get coal out of the bin. And at that time, it wasn't Wyoming coal. I don't know where it came from. But you could almost squeeze it and crush it. So it was whatever you call that. That's soft coal. But Wyoming coal is hard coal, and you can't crush it. And that's why it's labeled as a clean burning coal. The legislative body right now, I don't think the legislative body should do anything as far as coal goes. I think they should diversify the economy, yes, and I think that we should pursue other means of energy, and at the same time continue to produce the coal and the coal that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Do you want me to repeat the question, or?
No, I think I have it.
Okay.
I think a large key to that is economic, for Wyoming and the prosperity of our state is economic development and diversifying, not just having minerals, if that's acceptable in that. With the minerals, we have research being done to try to reduce the carbon dioxide output from coal, and cleaner coal would satisfy some people. I'm not sure that I'm not sure what all the issues are, but the natural gas is being used. It's about 3 times higher. So your kilowatt of electricity will cost you 3 times more with natural gas, and it's the second closest. Another option that seems to be a pretty scary one now is uranium and nuclear power plants. With coal, if you have an accident, you kind of dust the soot off. With uranium, you could have a more serious accident. But in the U.S., we have Harrisburg or the nuclear plant in Pennsylvania was an example of how the system does work for uranium. And I think at some point in time we might go back to that. But for Wyoming, economic diversity of other kinds besides just minerals would be and we're working on it very successfully too.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want another bit to speak on that? Okay, well, we have another question from the audience. In 1972, and this will be Mr. Wright will be next, the first off. In 1992, voters supported term limits. Do you believe in this? And that was a ballot initiative, actually. Speaking of, that was the topic earlier. Do you believe in term limits, and why? And I'll just, as a little bit of background for the audience, is that the term limits law was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So I think what is implied here is, would you support a constitutional amendment to allow term limits? And I know I'm taking it a step further, but that's the implication, and we'll start with Mr. Wright.
Okay. I don't think I could support a constitutional amendment to establish term limits per se. I think that there should be some means that would convince people, especially elected officials, that you being elected into a position with state government, federal government, it's not supposed to be a lifelong adventure. The bad thing about that is if someone stays in 30 years, eventually they believe it's their kingdom. They get to a point where they hold things up. They talk about, say the Speaker of the House or the Majority Whip, whatever the case may be. He gets to a point where people, when he votes for something, everyone votes with him. So now I'm going to backtrack. If there are term limits, then maybe people are motivated to get things done so that they have a legacy when they leave office. Without term limits, the more I think about it, who establishes the term limits? How long would it be? And I would have to have that discussion before I could say, yes, let's do term limits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eklund.
I would probably oppose them. When the ballot initiative was done several years ago, I voted for it. And I think I was a supervisor on the Conservation District at the time. And then I found out that an old-time supervisor that was on there, his term would be over, and I really didn't want to lose the wisdom that man brought to the Conservation District. And so I do think that the system we have of voters cutting that off and setting the term limits with their vote is probably adequate, and I guess I'd rather just leave it the way it is and not have to run another Supreme Court battle to see if we can do it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
I would oppose the constitutional amendment for term limits because we already have it. And the first one occurs on August 19th. Every election is an opportunity to limit somebody's term, and it happens with great regularity. I don't know the exact numbers of the turnover in the Wyoming legislature, but it's somewhere between a fourth and a third in a 2-year period. It really does occur. Now, there are exceptions of the person who has been there for 15, 20, 30 years, but that's the choice of the people in that district. And to have a law that says, we don't care what you think, you're going to lose your legislator and that experience, as was mentioned, I think it's just not very smart.
Thank you. Does anyone want any more time on that? Okay, and There's a question that has occurred to me. We're going to circle around back to number one about the legislature vis-a-vis the other two branches of government. And prison, jail overcrowding is an issue, and we built a medium security prison very recently in Torrington, and it's very expensive to staff it and take care of health care of all the inmates. So in light of that, what do you feel about the legislature's role of setting mandatory minimum sentences in the criminal code and not leaving it to the discretion of the judges in the courtroom to decide the sentences, so that the legislature controls the minimum sentences there? It is a possible effect on our jail population, prison population, and I'll start with Mr. Eklund, if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, that could be kind of getting into legislative overreach. We do have the judicial branch, and we I think we should trust them to make those decisions. There are some crazy things in the law where people who have a minor drug charge end up landing in prison for years, and someone with much more serious crimes ends up out, and it's because of laws that have mandatory sentences and whatnot. So yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I kind of agree that would be an area that we should stay out of. And there has to be a way of dealing with the prison population and the overcrowding. A lot of it is drug use and problems that would be better solved through some other means, maybe some counseling and whatnot. If it's violent drug use and violent crime, then they probably have to be kept away from society. But there are an awful lot of good people in prison, is my understanding. I think, and I'm kind of hard on crime, so I don't know where to draw the line on that. But I do think mandates by the legislature that limits the judgment of a professional, the courts, is probably not a good thing.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
I've always been opposed to mandatory sentences. I've been involved in the judicial system as an attorney and seen what can happen, what it's like. No two cases are alike. The defendants, the evidence, everything is different from one case to the next. Always keep in mind that the judge who passes the sentence, it's not the jury, it's the judge who passes the sentence, has been there for that entire trial and has heard all of the evidence. He's heard the testimony after a conviction on the mitigating circumstances or aggravating circumstances, whatever may be involved that goes into the sentence. The judge has heard it all, and I just don't believe there's anybody in a better position to decide what's the appropriate sentence for a given crime than the judge. I think it would be inappropriate for the legislature to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I think it would be inappropriate for the legislator to establish minimum prison sentences. And the reason behind that is because, for example, that guy that doesn't have, that can't pay for his medical insurance gets arrested for something. He's more than likely going to have a public defender as his attorney. In my experience, public defenders are notorious for plea bargaining, and that guy's going to spend some time in jail. So if there's a minimum standard established by the legislative body, that guy's going to spend a lot of time in jail. But if the judge has discretion, the judge understands. He's talked to the person, he's talked to both attorneys, he's talked to the people that have done the research and the sentencing investigation, and the judge is the best person to determine the sentence that befits the crime and the personality of this person and the probability that this person has learned this lesson.
Thank you. Any more to say? And if not, I think we'll go ahead and I think it's been a great discussion, and I appreciate all the thought you've put into the answers. And we'll move into the 2-minute closing at this point, and use it any way you want to bring up a new issue or further comment on what you've done, or just sum up. And we'll start with Mr. Jones. No, I'm sorry, we started with Mr. Jones before, so it's Mr. Wright this time. We'll start with you for your 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay, my name, as you know, my name is Gaylen Wright, and I ask for your vote in all of the upcoming elections. I don't have an opponent in the primary. I will have an opponent in the general. I ask for your vote. The reason that I chose to run for office was not because of pay. I didn't even think about the pay. The reason that I chose to run for this office was so that I could add my voice to the legislative body and help with some of the decisions that are made that affect the lives of people within the district, within the state, and sometimes within the entire country, because Wyoming is a model. Wyoming will be a model. I'm completely interested in the educational process. I mentioned earlier that one of the ladies that I talked to knocked on her door. As soon as I knocked on her door, I told her I was running for office. She said, "Come in, I got to give you an earful." She tells me that she went to her school, which she can see out of her front door, at 11:30 at night to register her kid for 7 o'clock in the morning. Spent the night out there, and there were 30 other parents with her. Okay. I keep walking. I knock on doors. And next, I talk to another educator, someone in the educational field. And I said, why would that happen? He brought it up. I said, why would that happen? And he says, because they build the current standards. Well, the communication somewhere was lost. I want to be the voice of those people. I want to be the voice of the veterans, the farmers and the ranchers, and everyone. I just want to make sure that everyone has a fair shake. State employees, the numbers sometimes don't come out right when they talk about raises. I was there. I know what the numbers mean, and I'd like to add that to that equation. So that's why I'm running for this office, and that's why I asked for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I originally ran for office because I thought I had things to add to it. I had some ideas, and I've always been involved in some kind of public service, usually in a lower level in the community. And serving in the state legislature has been a huge honor, not just for my constituents, but for the whole state of Wyoming. I have enjoyed that. I've learned quite a bit, and in the 4 years that I've been there, that education comes, I think, will come in handy. If I'm reelected, I'll have a head start on things that I had to learn, and I'm still learning. I think economic development is something that the state needs. I think that we need education reform. One of the things Gaylen mentioned was our facilities commission has really gone through a lot of turmoil, and it's been a difficult, been tough to get that thing to work right, and it's affected the city of Cheyenne quite a great deal in the recent years with overcrowding they have in the schools. All of these this is work left undone, and I'd like to be involved in shaping policy as we continue forward. I think that my education in agriculture, which has been lifelong, is something that helps the main industry in Laramie County. I also think that I've supported really anything that is important to Cheyenne, as well as the whole state of Wyoming. When you represent, you find out that you're not just representing a handful of people. You've got the whole state to consider, and you consider that, and I've done that. I think I would like to continue to do that for another 4 years. I know I would.
Thank you.
2 years.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Jones, 2 minutes.
Thank you again for coming and for giving us the opportunity to tell you what we think on some of these issues. When I started this process several months ago, I tried to look at my district and figure out who lives there and what matters. And it appeared to me that the district, to a large degree, was made up of professionals and their employees, small business owners and their employees in agriculture. And I thought I had a pretty unique set of qualifications that fit that. My father started a small business in 1935, which still exists today, so I grew up in a small business family. I've always been a small businessman myself, and I've been an advocate for the small business people of Wyoming through my lobbying for many, many years. I own a farm. I'm not here to say that I'm a farmer like John. Thank goodness I never had to depend on my farm to make a living. That wasn't made the difference on my living, but I certainly do understand the ups and downs of agriculture. I know what it takes to do that and to survive. Because of that, I think I had a proven record in my last time in the legislature. I was the sponsor or floor manager of several important pieces of legislation, one of which was the Sunset Law, now known as Management Audit, that talks about government efficiency. I was the sponsor of the first Main Street program, which was an economic development program. I was the person probably more responsible than anybody else in the legislature who rescued the Wyoming retirement system from financial bankruptcy, and I did the same thing, along with other people, obviously, it's a team sport, with the Wyoming workers' compensation system. It was broke, and we fixed it, and I think that experience and that knowledge can help the voters of House District 42.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, you can watch this on TV, Channel 19, on Tuesday, July 15th at 6 p.m., and we'll have it also posted on the League of Women Voters website. And thank you very much for coming in person, streaming online, and thank you to the candidates.
Nicely done. Nicely done.